Warning, the following video contains discussion of multiple different forms of abuse, physical, sexual, romantic, familial, and others, as well as mental illness such as imposter syndrome, depression, and thoughts and acts of suicide. If any of these topics make you feel uncomfortable in any way now or during their section, please turn off the video. The video will be segmented based on these topics, so if you are comfortable skipping past the ones that present a risk and watching the rest, feel free to do so. Thank you for your time, and enjoy! I am not a parent. That's probably obvious if you've been watching my channel long enough, but I feel it's important to clarify that going in. A lot of people will say that I have no right to tell parents what their kids should watch because I've never raised one, and those people are absolutely right. If you are one of those people, and a parent yourself, this video is not for you. But I suggest you watch it anyway, if only to hear an opposing argument that will make you more informed about how your opposition thinks. This video is for the people who say those things but also have not raised children before. It is for the people who assume adult topics should stay out of kids' shows without experiencing a situation as a parent or a child that would warrant further thought on the topic. I'm no parent, but I was a child whose parents were largely out of the picture, so most of my morals were taught by television. Teen Titans taught me how to value my friends. Ed, Edd, and Eddy taught me the importance of honesty and that lying is no way to succeed at anything. Codename Kids Next Door? Well, we'll get to that. My point is that a lot of children in the world don't have parental guardians that are capable of teaching them about life as an adult. Many parents don't know how to teach their kids these things. Many parents don't have the time because they're too busy supporting their kids in the first place. And many parents throughout the world are dead. I think it's important for shows like Steven Universe to exist so that the kids who never get the talk can still have a responsible source from which to learn about adult topics. This show discusses familial and romantic abuse, the spectrum of gender and sexuality, and even sexual intercourse itself in a manner that is meant to teach children right from wrong about each without letting the ones who don't know about these subjects get exposed to them too early. It is a masterstroke of educational television, and I am going to explain to you why. My name is Jordan Szymanski. My parents divorced when I was a year old. My mother died when I was 11. Let's talk about Steven Universe and why we should teach adult topics in kids' cartoons.
Sometimes I get the feeling the more that I know, the more the pain starts to grow. And then it starts to feel like I'm losing control with every new thing I know. I'm driving 85, I'm seeing double lines, and I'm afraid I might lose my hold. Wish I was never told, wish heavy on my soul. Well, every moment I'm getting cold.
Maybe you think this show does the opposite of what I said it does earlier, that it exposes children to these concepts too early, that it places biases in their minds towards same-sex relationships, and makes them curious about sexual intercourse at a young age. If you think this, it's probably because of one element the show has introduced: fusion. For those who haven't seen it, Steven Universe features a race of alien beings known as gems. Their biology consists of a gem core, which is their only solid body, while the rest of them is a malleable form constructed of pure light. This malleability allows gems to fuse their metaphysical forms together to create a whole new being. This process and its resulting form being referred to as a fusion. There are a lot of things that fusion is used as an allegory for in Steven Universe, one of them being sexual intercourse, which makes sense as the act of fusing is literally two beings becoming one. After reaching this conclusion, some then begin to worry if every fusion in the show is an allegory for sexual intercourse. And the reason I say worry is because at least two of the characters who undergo fusions in this show are underage. Steven, as half gem and half human, is able to fuse with both gems and humans. He uses this ability to fuse with Connie at multiple different points in the show, but Steven also fuses with each of his 3 gem caretakers and at one point even with his father, Greg. This naturally makes the people who think fusion equals sex very uncomfortable. So it should soothe you to know that this is an incorrect interpretation.
Whoa, hold the phone. Now give the phone to me.
Fusion is sometimes used as an allegory for sex, but not always, and certainly never with Steven or Connie. I'm going to show you a clip of the first time Steven and Connie fuse. While you're watching, keep in mind that these are 13-year-old children who have rarely, if ever, had any friends the same age as them, and certainly none that they've been able to crush on. They've hung out together often, they know each other, they feel comfortable with each other, they've almost kissed by this point. They are close friends, and that friendship has always had something more to it. Here's the clip, just keep an open mind, alright? Oh man, YouTube didn't like that I used the audio for this section. Who could have predicted this? In light of that, here's a redundant summary because I can't give you the music and voice acting for this scene. I'll put a link in the description so you can watch the genuine article if you want to do that, and I'm sure I'll find a way to upload my original version of this entire video onto Patreon for free if you guys want to check that out. Enough preamble, here's the synopsis. So Steven sets the phone to play, he steps back, he invites Connie to dance with him. Connie smiles, well, shyly or whatever, and then they join hands and, oh man, look at that, look at those smiles, look at how innocent they are, and now they're dancing. Oh, they're dancing, look at those little feet going on tip-tap, and now they're turning, oh, she turns around, and she's all surprised, and then Steven goes away, he does his weird, cringy moves, and then she rocks out, and he's all laughing and blushing, and look at that pretty sparkle. Oh, they slammed into each other, but Connie catches him, and now they're all close together, they're laughing again, heads pressed together, and that's the end of the scene. Now, I don't know about you, but when I see this clip, I see two kids who like each other dancing clumsily and laughing in a joyful manner. Is the scene romantic? Of course it is. Kids do romance just as much as adults do. But is it sexual? I don't see it. Nothing about Connie or Steven is remotely sexualized in this show at any point. Stevani is looked upon with admiration, but they are neither Steven nor Connie. They are a physical manifestation of the experience that is their childish infatuation with one another, of the innocent fun to be had with a genuine romantic bond. And I think it's a really nice touch that Lars and Sadie are the ones first seen reacting to them like this, because Stevani is exactly what both of them want with each other at this point in the series. Steven's fusion with Greg appears only in a situation where Greg needs to disappear for a bit and the showrunners wanted a really cool song to play. Said song, Independent Together, is a song about freedom of expression, freedom from the expectations of others. Both Steven and Greg value this freedom quite a bit, and they're both musically talented. Stag is an expression of that shared bond, musical and spiritual. Every fusion with Steven involved is like this. Smoky Quartz is an expression of Steven and Amethyst's shared feelings of inadequacy and weirdness. Rainbow Quartz 2.0 is an expression of Steven and Pearl's desire to give care to people, their desire to keep things both lively and safe. Sunstone is an expression of Steven, Sapphire, and Ruby's desire to educate kids in fun and helpful ways. Everything depicted in fiction bases its roots in a human experience, and fusion is no exception. But there are many ways to feel like you understand another person on a strong, intimate level. These can be sexual, yes, but they can also be romantic or platonic or purely professional. Steven Universe makes a valiant effort to cover as many of these unions as it can. But maybe the fact that it covers sex at all is a problem for you. Many think that children shouldn't be taught about sex and sexuality until they're nearing their teens, when puberty is likely to hit. I know that a lot of parents do not want their children to think about sex until their bodies leave them no other choice. If the thought of children learning about the spectrum of sexuality and the details of sexual intercourse makes you uncomfortable, I have bad news. They are going to find out anyway, whether you tell them or not. Kids are not stupid. They know when something is being kept from them, and today they have access to far more information than any of us want them to have. Set up all the parental controls you want, block certain websites from their browsers, even deny them a phone until a certain age. It will not be enough. They will go to school, where they will meet other kids whose parents may not have those parental controls, or their friends will have found a way to bypass those controls, possibly by going to the library and using a computer there, or even just by reading a book. My sister learned about sex from Western erotic fiction when she was 11, printed in a book, and she was born in the 70s. The internet wasn't really in use at the time. So now that all human information is readily available at the touch of our fingertips, you think you're going to be the one to keep this from your kid, who is actively looking for answers because children are inherently curious, which is a wonderful thing? Maybe you think you can keep them from finding out by putting them through homeschool until they're ready for high school and have the talk with them then. Well, my mother tried that on me, and guess what? It didn't work. I hit puberty at age 10 and learned that women have boobs from bleach, and it was all downhill from there. But thank God I didn't learn it from an online forum or a video game where people actively seek out young people just beginning puberty to prey on. Let me restate that number for emphasis. Not age 13, not even age 12, age 10. I have friends who began puberty when they were 9. It happens earlier than everyone wants to believe, and leaving kids unprepared for it is unimaginably dangerous. So if children are going to find out about sex anyway, isn't it better for them to learn from a TV show that's going to teach them right from wrong than it is to learn from a stranger online or by playing doctor? Steven Universe does that, teaches kids about sex in a way that not only teaches safe practices, but doesn't even let the kids too young for it know what sex is. And it does so with one of my favorite characters in the series, Garnet. Garnet is the fusion of Sapphire and Ruby, but for most of Season 1, she's just Garnet. We aren't introduced to the gems that make her up until the season finale. All we know is their shared bond. Said bond is basically marriage in its truest form. Two people who love each other enough to want to spend their whole lives together. There is exactly one scene where this fusion that is Garnet is treated sexually, and it's a flashback in Season 2 where Garnet is telling Steven how Ruby and Sapphire met. Quick synopsis for you. Sapphire is a prophetic bigwig in the war against Steven's mom, Rose Quartz, who leaps into their camp to assassinate Blue Diamond, basically an oligarch of Gemkind. Sapphire had a vision of this happening and herself poofing to capture the rebels, which is sorta like if getting stabbed meant you were in a temporary coma instead of 6 feet under. Still sucks, still hurts, but it's not fatal. She tells Blue Diamond about this vision, then lets it slip to one of her Ruby guards, and this Ruby guard isn't chill with it, so she saves Sapphire at the last minute. Sudden physical contact and a rush of emotions results in the first known fusion of two different gems. Everybody hates it. BD threatens to shatter Ruby, which is like death, and Sapphire grabs Ruby and runs away. The rest of the episode is the two of them walking around Earth and figuring out what just happened and what it all means for both of them. Check out these lyrics. Well, I just can't stop thinking. So, you say I was different? And you haven't before? Of course not. When would I have ever? I'm so sorry. No, don't be. And now you're here forever. What about you? What about me? Well, you're here too. We're here together. This scene hits me like if Romeo and Juliet actually talked to each other after their first fling. A kid who doesn't know what sex is will probably lose interest in this scene, but anybody who does is going to see it for what it is. Two people going through a whirlwind romance, taking a second to breathe and talk and get to know each other. It's the transition from a single fling between two virgins to a true romantic bond, and it's important that the way they get there is by talking, by spending time together besides doing or being what they just were. This isn't the point where their bond becomes effectively marriage, but it does lead into that point. And I know that Sapphire and Ruby get legally married later on in the show, but they've been together for the last 5,750 years. By that point, it's basically marriage without the ring. What is also interesting about this marriage bond, though, is that the show uses Garnet as one of its main ways to discuss sex with other gems, which has implications of polyamory, or at least side pieces. This is a good way for me to show you what defines a fusion as sex versus the pure innocence found in Stevani's fusion. There are 2 episodes in the series with a focus on Garnet's fusion with another gem. One episode is her fusion with Amethyst, the other with Pearl. In episode 20 of Season 1, Coach Steven, Garnet and Amethyst fuse against Pearl's wishes to destroy a tower that's causing electromagnetic interference, and I feel I only need to show one image to demonstrate why this is sexual.
Yeah, that's the one.
Generally, if a fusion is meant to be sexual, you can usually tell while the fusing is happening. Whatever dance that precedes the fusion is usually given some kind of sexual nature to it. Though sometimes we can only infer that it's sexual from the way other people treat it, like with Garnet's first fusion way back in The Answer. Back to the present though, Pearl's issue with the formation of Sugalite is that Garnet and Amethyst can be unstable when they're fused, and in their current situation they need to be careful. This description of Sugalite, coupled with the fusion's rampant destruction later in the same episode, provides us with a couple innocent and not-so-innocent themes. On the surface, the episode is about being wise and cautious rather than rash and impulsive. It's about the meaning of strength and that a strong will and mind are more valuable than a strong body. When applied to sex, the message becomes a lesson in taking precautions with your partner and avoiding rushed intercourse. Choosing not to be careful can be destructive, as seen here. This is a lesson the characters learn as we do, and they apply it to the second Garnet fusion in the series. Third. I forgot about Alexandrite. She's not sexual, though. She's just mom mom incarnate. In Season 2, Episode 10, Cry for Help, the Crystal Gems discover the relay tower they destroyed in Season 1 has been repaired by Peridot, a homeworld gem basically intent on destroying the Earth who has now been stranded on the Earth. Steven suggests that Garnet and Amethyst fuse into Sugilite to trash the tower, but Garnet learns from history and opts to fuse with Pearl instead. A suggestion Pearl made the last time this tower situation happened that Garnet shot down. They fuse into Sardonyx and disassemble the tower without destroying it thoroughly the way Sugilite would have, but also without losing control. Again, we have several images in this episode to convey just how sexual this fusion is, like the seductive eyes from Pearl here. Their fusion is more sensual and less abrupt than Garnet and Amethyst's, but it's definitely sexual. Sardonyx is every bit as full of herself as Sugilite is, but she's far more reasonable and controllable. No, the issue with control comes from Pearl alone, as she becomes obsessed with becoming Sardonyx, repairing the relay tower again and again to manipulate Garnet into fusing with her. This is in stark contrast to Amethyst, who at this point has learned exactly what she did wrong as Sugilite. She has a whole musical number about how she forgot how great it felt to be together with Garnet, how she got carried away. I had to use you to make me feel strong, but I don't care about that now. Is there something I can do? Can I make it up to you? She recognizes the part she played in Sugilite losing control, and now all she wants is to show Garnet that she is trustworthy. And in a roundabout way, she gets her wish. When Steven and Amethyst find out what Pearl's been doing, neither of them can stand to watch Garnet and Pearl fuse again. And who can blame them? The entire concept of what Pearl's been doing, using her friend for the equivalent of a sexual thrill, is absolutely disgusting. The closest innocent parallel to this is understanding that Pearl lied to get something from a friend, but that something would still be hard for a child to understand without knowing about intercourse. This, to my knowledge, is the first time in the show that something can't be properly explained without prior knowledge of sex. But it is essential for children to know about this kind of thing because they are often targets of it. I couldn't tell you how many friends I have now who were molested and abused by friends, cousins, siblings, even parents, and didn't know what was going on until much, much later in life. The offenders in these cases would always lie, call it something more innocent, act as though it was something normal, guilt-tripping and confusing the child until they agreed to something that they didn't even understand. This allows many criminals to get away with abusing children because the child is unable to provide evidence or even properly explain what's been done to them. Many kids will just lie and say the person did nothing to them because it's easier than trying to explain, and besides, they're family, right? They wouldn't do anything to hurt me. It must just be a misunderstanding. It's my fault this happened. I didn't do something right. I made them angry or did something I shouldn't have. These are easier things for a child to understand than I am being abused by someone I trust. By the time children do understand and are able to say what really happened, years will have passed between the crime and this new statement. The case has often already been closed, and at least here in the US, it is unbearably common for people to assume the child was telling the truth at first and is now lying to get attention, or any number of other reasons one can think of to allow themselves the freedom of denying what one of their loved ones did to another. The truth is often so horrifying that we refuse to believe it simply because we don't want to. This episode provides us with an example of a valid response to discovering abuse in this manner. Garnet is furious, and no amount of reasoning from Pearl or Amethyst will make her back down from that. I can understand the disgust with Amethyst for defending Pearl at this point, and I agree with the disgust with Pearl for doing this to Garnet at all. I feel that both of these feelings are important to instill in this episode's audience because it shows us what this situation is like. An event like this ruptures a family, drives a wedge between all parties involved, and it's really difficult to parse out all the different emotional factors. Should we blame the defenders of the criminal for caring about the wrong family member? What about the ones who stay neutral? Are they in the wrong for being too overwhelmed by the situation to pick a side? For not being able to help the victim in the first place? Someone should have noticed sooner. Someone should have done something. The signs were all there. But hindsight is 20/20. The fact is that none of them did notice until it was already too late, and even then, some of them did choose to side with the criminal instead of the victim. The episode doesn't tell us who is forgiven and who is not. That question has to wait for later. Instead, we get a depiction of a crying spoon forgiving a pear and embracing, followed by this. It sure would be nice if things worked out the way they do in cartoons. Yeah, it would. Steven Universe knows that what happened in this episode cannot be as simple as what it would be in a show like Crying Breakfast Friends. But I take it a step further and say this is also the writers reaching out to the audience. The whole episode ends with Steven turning off his TV, closing our window into his world. Through this action, he is acknowledging that he is the cartoon, that what is going to happen with this plotline is simple, far more simple than the situation is in the real world. And it is a plotline. What follows is 2 episodes of tension, drama, and duress with a couple fillers thrown in between. Keystone Motel throws in a quick warning about meeting strangers on the internet, then jumps straight into Ruby and Sapphire coming undone over this, fighting over it for the first time in the entire series. Both gems are clearly upset over what Pearl's done and how the other is reacting to it, but while Sapphire tries to deny her emotions, Ruby gives free rein to hers. Both literally create too toxic an environment for Steven to survive there long term. Steven wants both of them to talk to each other, but their stubbornness keeps them at odds the whole night and even through the morning, causing Steven to storm out on them. This episode isn't about intercourse, it's about the effect serious arguments like this can have on children. Each of the crystal gems is essentially a mixture of mother and sister to Steven, and he has rarely seen Garnet, much less Ruby and Sapphire, fight anyone before. Suddenly, Pearl has done something awful, and Ruby and Sapphire can't agree on how to respond to it. Steven was always able to cheer them up before, but no matter how hard he tries now, it isn't enough. Just as it is difficult for children to see abuse in someone they trust, it is also difficult for them to see the bigger picture in situations like this. All Steven knows is that no matter where he goes, his friends are angry, and that tells him that they're angry at him. This is the moment that gets Ruby and Sapphire to actually talk and try to understand one another, which is itself a lesson. Sometimes you need the perspective of a third party to get closer to an understanding, even if that third party is the child you're arguing is distressing. Finally, we have episode 15, Friendship, which is very on the nose. Like on a Pinocchio level. The episode features the main cast finally catching up to Peridot, whom Pearl has been tracking religiously ever since she sidetracked them by manipulating Garnet. Pearl is by far the most overzealous of the group in capturing Peridot, who plays the whole group's moves against each other in her efforts to escape. She taunts them, berates them, and manipulates them, the perfect distraction for Pearl's anxiety and fear. Pearl is letting herself think that capturing Peridot will make up for what she's done. Back in episode 10, Garnet mentioned how much time Pearl had wasted. She is choosing to think about that rather than what the real problem is. Which makes sense. Pearl's used to being a servant, used to devoting herself entirely to a specific task, used to being punished when she failed or when she avoided the work. Rather than choose the obvious problem of manipulating her friends into a physical and emotional union, she focuses on the pain she knows. But I've said this before, emotions don't just go away if you ignore them. The truth of the situation is not lost on Pearl, so she can't focus nearly as much as she would like. Multiple times throughout the episode, Steven, Amethyst, and Garnet are either hindered by or have to save Pearl from mistakes that Pearl made. Pearl is the reason they let Peridot escape twice this episode. She is also presumably the reason they can track her at all, since she's the most tech-savvy one among them, but the preparation doesn't make up for the execution. And besides, capturing Peridot is not the issue here. Amethyst says it herself. It won't help. She could hand Peridot over on a silver platter, but it won't make up for the stunt she pulled to get Garnet to fuse with her. Nothing ever will, because Pearl already made her decision and acted upon it. Now it's Garnet's decision when and if she is forgiven. But Pearl keeps trying so hard that she lures all of them into a death trap, especially her and Garnet. The two of them are trapped in a steadily closing space and are only saved by Amethyst and Steven working together to hold back the walls. This is the moment that would ever allow these two to talk. The need for survival is their only chance to reconcile. Pearl finally apologizes, but she still thinks that she had to do what she did, because she's never had what Garnet has. This is when we have to remember that no matter how much meaning we apply to the phenomenon of gem fusion, it is fundamentally different from anything we as humans could experience. The total combination of two or more minds and bodies into a single form, all positives and negatives meshed together. Pearl's greatest weakness is her anxiety, her fear that she isn't strong enough, isn't capable enough, that she will let everyone down. Garnet is seemingly never anxious, never wavers, never doubts herself or her friends until they prove themselves unworthy of trust. Imagine being as constantly unsure and in need of direction as Pearl is, and then suddenly feeling so confident, so self-assured, so certain that you are capable of whatever you set your mind to. That is a drug that I think anyone could become addicted to. I am not defending what she did, but it's a good frame from which we can understand abusers like her. Many who commit abuse were abused themselves at some point in their lives. They feel overwhelming anxiety and self-doubt, and to feel confident they need to exact control over something. Remind themselves that they can change their world in some way, even if it's by causing irreparable damage. And so the cycle runs its course, until someone decides that enough is enough. Pearl is too weak to be that person, and in this case it makes her both a victim and a predator. The situation is far too complicated for anyone but the victim of her crimes to decide whether or not she is worthy of forgiveness. Garnet decides to correct Pearl's judgment, to tell her exactly how much pain she caused the pair, about how Sapphire and Ruby fell apart over this, how they came undone. Garnet is not perfect. If anything, she's too confident. She can be incredibly stubborn in her decisions, which is devastating when she makes the wrong ones. Pearl is her foil in that, because all her insecurities make her ready to adapt to almost any situation when she's thinking clearly. By the end, Garnet understands what needs to be done for them to survive, but even when she offers to fuse, Pearl makes a stipulation. Only if you're okay with it. This is meant to be a sign that she finally understands what she did wrong. But notice that Garnet doesn't smile. Neither of them do. This doesn't feel like forgiveness to me. Forgiveness is never stated. Sardonyx doesn't jab or quip or do anything of the sort. She gets them out and then comes undone. They are not able to sustain a union like they used to. But it's a start. And when they almost catch Peridot, forcing her to blow off one of her feet to escape, Pearl and Garnet actually crack jokes and laugh together. I don't think this is realistic. I think a 4-episode gap between the inciting incident and the resolution is far too short a time for this to feel as impactful as it should. I think this laughter could be taken as a sign of forgiveness, and that is a potentially dangerous thing to teach kids involved in these situations. It very well could leave an impression that forgiveness for something this awful should only take about a month. But there are a few caveats to me saying that. First, remember that the first episode of this arc ended with the characters lamenting that things don't work the way they do in cartoons, before they diegetically acknowledge that they are in a cartoon. This is a minor band-aid, but it does make an attempt to remind anyone watching that whatever the resolution for this problem becomes, it's going to be unrealistic because it's a cartoon. Fiction can only go so far in representing something so viscerally connected to real life, particularly when it's managed by a children's network. Second, children experience time in a different way than adults do. A month for a child is a far longer stretch of time than it is for us. Third, remember what I said earlier about how it's not up to us to decide when the aggressor is forgiven? That decision is entirely up to the victim and we have no say in the matter? I've never been a victim of this kind of abuse, so whether it feels realistic to me or not for Garnet to forgive Pearl at this stage doesn't matter at all. She did forgive her, so the least I can do is respect that. I'd even argue that is part of the lesson, whether intentional or not. How jarring this may feel to you doesn't matter, because you're not the one who was hurt here. And in turn, if you were hurt like this by someone else, you are the one who decides if and when they are forgiven. No one else gets to change that. And fourth, studios are under a lot of stress. I tend not to have problems with the way cartoonists pace their shows because making a cartoon is incredibly difficult, especially in today's market. The network and producers and people who've never cooked a day in their lives keep putting their hands in the soup thinking they're chefs. It's entirely possible that Sugar's team just didn't have the time they needed to make this arc feel more plausible, or that the network felt that doing so would be going too far. It's a kids show, they have to stay friends at the end, or else the target audience feels uncomfortable, and cartoons don't exist to make people feel uncomfortable. Usually. We'll get to it. The point is that yes, this is potentially problematic, but there's a lot of reasons why it wound up that way, and frankly, the fact that they are addressing any of this in a kids show at all is a major step forward. Some would argue that poor representation is worse than no representation at all, but this isn't an intentional bastardization of the topic, it is genuine difficulty in portraying the topic the way the showrunners want to. And I'm not going to shoot a show in the head for making mistakes, especially when it's the only show out there that has tried. Steven Universe is the only children's cartoon I have seen to go this in-depth on the issues involved in sexual intercourse. It laid the groundwork for other shows to explore these topics too, in ways that are unique to themselves and that, hopefully, use SU as an example to learn from. Did we look at the Wright brothers and say, wow, that plane doesn't go very high or very fast, what losers? No, we said, holy fucking shit, those guys are fucking flying, holy fuck, that is a flying man! Hopefully you get my point. I'm really proud of Steven Universe for going this far with its lessons and broaching topics no other kids show has been willing to discuss. If the scenes we've discussed today make you uncomfortable, buckle up, motherfucker, because we've only just started! You think discussing sex and manipulation was too much? You don't know the half of it. This show goes so much fucking deeper than consent or a lack thereof. And the best part of that is kids who don't know about these experiences beforehand still won't be able to put all the pieces together, so innocence will be preserved! So remember the stuff I said about Stevani's fusion and Alone Together? The thing about that episode is it's a fantastic lens to discuss what fusion actually is. For the Gems, fusion looks natural and clean. They were two people, they are now one person, and whenever they want, they can be two people again. We still don't get it conceptually, but we don't have to because we're not Gems. Well, neither are Steven and Connie, but they can fuse. They have to figure out what fusion means for them, and it's really hard to get. They're together in the truest sense of the word, but that means they aren't together in the way humans are used to. It's like being on a Discord call with your significant other constantly because you're halfway across the world from them. Yeah, you're together, you're able to talk and hang out, but are you really together? They aren't separate beings, so they don't get their separate donuts to share together. They don't have the necessary comfort of another person who is physically present when first experiencing something unknown. They don't have each other because they are each other. There are times when Stevani says something like, "Are you okay?" or "I wish you were here. If you were, it would be easier." And we can't tell which of their two parts are saying it. And that's not nearly the hardest part. Fusion is a meld of body and mind. Steven and Connie are both 13, so a fusion of the two of them looks taller and more mature. Their innocent, fun experience is beautiful, and Stevani is a physical representation of that beauty. But humans don't know fusion, so none of their friends recognize Stevani as one. They don't see Steven or Connie, they see a beautiful woman who looks to be about their age. Which becomes a problem when Stevani goes to do big kid things like clubbing and gets hit on by a scummy teen, maybe even a young adult. This situation is incredibly uncomfortable to anyone who understands what it means. Stevani doesn't like it, we don't like it, but Stevani is not emotionally equipped to deal with it. Two kids does not an adult make, so when she reluctantly goes to dance with this asshole, it is not the majestic series of movements she displayed when she arrived. It is a childish tantrum. It is not fun for Stevani, it is not fun for anyone else. And when the fun stops, Stevani stops. Scumbag McGee runs away, and the two kids laugh at finally being together in a way they understand. This show just dealt with the existential horror of losing yourself in someone else and the experience of being creeped on by an older male in the same episode. Ready to go back to Garnet talk yet? Too bad! They get creeped on again by the same guy in a different episode. The same guy who also teaches Steven how to be a game-playing Wangrod in a different episode. You don't get to be safe here, fuck you! This episode and the character it introduces are not here because it makes anything funnier or more entertaining. They are here purely to educate children. As you are growing up, and especially if you were designated female at birth, you will be looked at like this regardless of your level of interest. You will be approached by people, often older ones, and it will be scary and creepy and gross. This happens to children, and to pretend otherwise is not only a great falsehood, but also a grave mistake in the handling of a child. Like I said, kids are smart. The only reason people think they're not is because adults like us rarely tell them what they should do in certain situations. I'm not advocating for traumatizing a kid by describing pedophilia in detail to them, but the least you can do is let them know that if a stranger tries to talk to them or grab them, they should leave. If they can't leave, then scream, kick up a fuss, draw attention to yourself to scare the person off. This episode teaches kids about that rule without really showing them the gravity of the situation, thus preserving innocence at the same time that it saves lives. Yes, lives! Between 1993 and 1997, the Criminal Division of the Washington State Attorney General's Office performed a study regarding cases of child abduction homicides where the primary motive was sexual assault. Nearly 60% of the cases they studied held a 2-hour period where the parents hadn't even called the police yet. In 76% of the cases they studied, the child was dead within 3 hours. An additional 12.5% accounts for the ones that died later, but no later than a day after abduction. Children are often targeted for how they look, and when that targeting becomes fanatical enough to result in death, said death happens incredibly quickly. Am I suggesting that this episode would stop that from happening altogether? Of course not. It might not even help in a lot of cases. But this is a way to defend yourself, and more importantly, it'll get kids who are old enough to notice how uncomfortable Stevonnie feels to start asking questions. Why does this make them feel uncomfortable? Why does it make me feel uncomfortable? What should I do if someone does this to me, or does something even worse? This is teaching children to use their endless curiosity intelligently. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that there's a difference between questions kids ask offhand just because they can and they're a little curious about everything, and questions they ask because they really want to know the answer. It's like the difference between a child saying why because they like the sound of the word, and the same child saying why while looking directly at you, waiting for you to give them an honest answer. In the words of Atticus Finch, when a child asks you something, answer him for goodness sake, but don't make a production of it. Children are children, but they can spot an evasion quicker than adults, and evasion simply muddles them. This show exists to provide answers to questions that many children don't know to ask yet, and it provides those answers in ways that leave the kids who aren't ready for them none the wiser about their existence. Many kids who see this episode about Stevonnie aren't going to get it. They'll say, ew, lovey-dovey stuff, or this isn't fun, or funny, or cool, and change the channel, or look for something else on their streaming service. But for kids who are ready, who see the subtleties, or have gone through this themselves, the episode is there to prompt further investigation. You are not the only one this happens to, it says. You are not alone. And if you are, then we are alone together. Which is exactly how I would classify another set of characters in this show, but with the opposite vibe. In the finale for Season 1, Jailbreak, the antagonist at the time Jasper fuses with Lapis Lazuli in an attempt to gain enough power to destroy the crystal gems. Lapis agrees to this because the moment they've fused into Malachite, she is able to bind Jasper without the latter being able to do anything about it. Lapis drags herself and Jasper as Malachite down to the bottom of the ocean, where they spend the entire second season together before a big fight in the debut of Season 3, where Malachite is defeated and the two separate. The only reason these two fuse is to gain power. Jasper wants the power to destroy the crystal gems. Lapis wants the power to imprison someone else for a change. Both are vengeful. Both are directing their hatred towards the wrong thing, and both end up causing each other significant suffering because of it. Malachite is a prime example of an abusive relationship. She is monstrous and destructive, but also limited by herself and constantly at war with herself. Neither person involved is happy, and both of them together are the reason why. In episode 9 of Season 2, Chile Teed, the crystal gems are out scouring the ocean for Malachite when Steven's human need for sleep calls them back home. When he falls asleep, he has a nice humorous dream about being in an old black and white sitcom situation with the other gems, preparing for a dance with Connie. It's all very chill and relaxed and exactly the kind of thing you want out of a kid's cartoon.
Lapis?
Okay, never mind. I meant to say that he dreams about Dogcopter and gets spit out by Pearl so he can catch up to him, and yeah, okay, we're not having fun today, are we? This episode is where Steven first gets his ability to connect with the minds of other gems. Using this ability, he's able to enter the mindscape of Malachite and get a glimpse at Lapis and Jasper's separate existences inside the fusion they've created. Lapis can't allow herself to talk with Steven for too long or else risk losing her grip on Jasper, who is so violently deranged that she can't even hold a conversation. Steven offers to help Lapis, but her only response is no. She doesn't want help. Just let me do this for you. She is literally tying herself down, unnecessarily, out of a misguided attempt to repay the only person who's shown her kindness. Lapis has to perform multiple layers of mental gymnastics to convince herself that this is what she wants, and nothing Steven says to the contrary will convince her otherwise. Jasper doesn't need to do any of that. She has far too much anger for any kind of logic to factor in. All she wants is to make Steven pay for bringing her so low. This single-mindedness is what causes Jasper to take control of Malachite in the end. Lapis has always been stretching herself too thin, and Jasper has always had a target on someone's head. Malachite isn't just an abusive relationship, she's two people who abuse themselves in different ways, projecting that abuse onto each other. I remember being a kid and seeing parents and people older than me in romantic relationships who didn't seem to like each other. Anytime I saw this, I thought, why are they still together then? Wouldn't it be better for them to separate? Malachite is the answer to that question. Yes, it would be better, but they don't because they're too used to the pain. Pain is familiar to them, and thus it is easier to deal with being hurt by someone and hurting that someone in return than being with someone who cares for you, or God forbid, being alone. This is a pairing defined by the phrase misery loves company. And it's important that their separation here at the beginning of Season 3 is not the last time we see the two together. In episode 15 of the same season, Alone at Sea, Steven and Greg invite Lapis out on a boat ride to help her get over her bad experiences with water. Unfortunately, something throws off the rudder and they're stranded out at sea until help arrives. This prompts an important conversation between Steven and Lapis where we get a deeper look at how she feels about being Malachite. It's not like that anymore. You don't have to be with Jasper. That's not it. I miss her. This is the problem with abusive partners. It's not as simple as you're with a bad person and you shouldn't be. Things get so tangled up that you often wonder if you're the problem, or maybe both of you are just bad people and thus deserve to be together as karmic punishment. But she's terrible. I'm terrible. I did horrible things. I broke your dad's leg. I stole your ocean. Go on, tell me I'm wrong. Lapis is used to the pain and struggle of being fused to Jasper in a way that feels justified, feels right. Like that's where she's supposed to be as punishment for the crimes she's committed. She committed those crimes in an attempt to get home again before she knew how much Homeworld had changed over the centuries. She didn't understand how much humans need the ocean. She just wanted to get home. At the time, she saw the crystal gems as her oppressors, the people who imprisoned and dehumanized her. Degemized? Anyway, Greg just happened to be caught in the crossfire during Lapis's fight. Hey folks, Future Jordan here with a correction. So I was going to briefly mention that Greg got caught in the crossfire during the Lapis Lazuli versus Crystal Gems fight. So what actually happened back there is that Steven and Connie fought along with the Crystal Gems against Lapis, and Lapis immediately started to drown them. Yeah, I know, the show gets pretty heavy. Now, there is the possibility that Lapis hasn't registered that humans need air to breathe, but that seems a little charitable to say considering that she goes straight for their heads. Like, if she knows enough about humans to know that they can't reform and that they have a significant weakness in the form of their heads, she is probably aware that they need to breathe. So Greg, seeing that his child's life is in danger, drives over the ocean Steven that's trying to drown them. In retaliation, this Steven sends his van up into the sky and it plummets to the ground, and then he breaks his leg inside it. I know I keep saying that things are important, but this actually does change a lot about the scene and how we view Lapis. Like, yeah, she sees the Crystal Gems as her enemies, but Steven is like her only friend, and she's definitely trying to kill him here. And when Steven's father saves his life, she doesn't have any problems with sending him into the sky. He could have broken his neck and died. Basically, all this does is lend validity to Lapis's statement of her being an awful person. Like, yeah, by this point in the series, she's had a lot of time to redeem herself, but man, that's pretty fucked up, right? I also think the most that she's done to redeem herself at this point is be nice to people. You kind of wonder why Steven's friends with her. Don't get me wrong, she's one of my favorite characters, but like... Anyway, Past Me is going to keep talking like Lapis did nothing wrong, so just bear in mind that that guy's biased as fuck and doesn't know what he's talking about. In regard to Lapis's morality exclusively. He knows what he's talking about elsewise. We good? Good. Alright, going back to Past Me. with her perceived captors. There is a rhyme and a reason to why she did all of the bad things she's done, but that doesn't get rid of her guilt. She saw Malachite as the only time she got to choose her punishment, choose her jail cell. She's been imprisoned for so long that it's the only way she knows how to live, and finding the will to let herself be free again is such a difficult and harrowing task that she misses the simplicity of captivity. And she doesn't have to look far to find it, as Jasper uses the ship's anchor to climb aboard. She's been looking for Lapis, and wastes no time in gaslighting her. You're pointing that shield the wrong way. She's the one you should be afraid of. You can't lie to me. I've seen what you're capable of. I thought I was a brute, but you? You're a monster. Classic abusive behavior. Jasper plays on Lapis's pre-existing beliefs about herself. She has gotten to know Lapis's inner thoughts more than anyone else, knows her on an intimate level, and uses that against her. Uses it to manipulate her. Humans do this too, although in many cases they aren't even aware of it. I doubt the same is true of Jasper, a tactical genius who was born the epitome of what a corpse is designed to be. She knows what she's doing here. She tosses Steven to the side, grabs Lapis's hand, gets on her knees,
Let's be Malachite again.
and proves me the hell wrong. Jasper is oblivious to how hurtful what she just said was. To her, being a monster is a compliment. Lapis is far stronger than Jasper, and Jasper knows it. Strength is the only thing she respects. Lapis may be the only person on Earth that Jasper sees as an equal, maybe even a superior. This has BDSM themes as far as I'm concerned. Jasper has always been in power, always been the one in control, and the moment she finds someone who can finally make her bend knee, she falls head over heels. But there's a healthy way to handle a relationship like that, and neither of these two know what that is. Jasper wants to be Malachite for the power she possessed. Lapis wants it for the same reason, and power over anything is never a good reason for a relationship. I liked taking everything out on you. I needed to. I hated you. It was bad! This is the fascinating thing about this episode. Before Jasper was here, Lapis missed her. She argued with Steven about that feeling as if it was justified. Not to invalidate anyone who's been in a position like this. I've been in a position like this, and I can tell you that how Lapis is feeling has a degree of validity to it. She's not right in thinking that she's a monster, but she has the right to miss what she had with Jasper. All feelings are valid, no matter how twisted they seem, and reacting like Steven did to these feelings, with confusion and disgust, only makes the victim of the abuse feel worse, feel wrong somehow, when their reaction is a very natural one to have. But the moment Jasper comes back, tells Lapis that she misses their relationship too, that she wants her back and explains her reasons why, Lapis talks herself out of it. She works through the reasons why Malachite was bad for both of them on screen during this discussion. What we had wasn't healthy. I never want to feel like I felt with you. Never again. Steven couldn't convince her to drop Malachite entirely because he wasn't part of Malachite. He didn't go through what she did. Jasper did go through it, and she wants more. That is a more compelling reason to refuse her than anything that anyone could ever have said or done. Still, it's normal for abusers to blame the loved ones of their victims when the latter finally decides they've had enough. Jasper threatens Steven's life, and Lapis defends him to the best of her ability, breaking the boat in the process. The remaining three on board lament the broken state of the boat as they fly away from it. But hey, the ocean is really beautiful from up here. Yeah, it is. The episode ends, and life moves on. Do you get why this is important for a child to see? Somewhere down the line, some young person out there has yet to experience the abuse of another. But they will. Because a lot of people do, and most of them aren't prepared when it happens. Maybe that child won't be, even after watching this episode. I mean, why would someone look to children's media as a guide for how to handle an abusive relationship? But maybe one day something will happen to separate them from the abuser, or maybe that child will be the abuser and be separated from their victim. Maybe it'll be hard to pin down which they really were. And maybe that person will think about their relationship and consciously or unconsciously the words and actions presented in this episode will stick out to them. I don't expect kids to remember specific moments of this show that teach them about how to handle difficult situations that adults are capable of and often need to handle. But you don't have to remember something for it to influence you. especially when you're a kid. And when you're a kid with little to no parental supervision, those influences are important. I wish I had a show like this growing up. It would have made a lot of things easier to understand. There's a reason I keep repeating myself, advocating so much for shows like this existing. I grew up in a small town up in the mountains, which meant there wasn't a lot to introduce me to different ways of thinking. Add in that my mother was rendered effectively mute from a series of strokes, which led to my older sister having to spend most of her time taking care of her, and you'll find I didn't have a lot of adult supervision growing up. Plus, I was the youngest of a very large family, so I got away with tons of stuff. Maybe I was spoiled? It's hard to say when you're the person that question is aimed at. But anyway, since my parents weren't able to teach me as much as they wanted to, I learned most of what I did by watching cartoons, as I mentioned in the intro, but I never said what I learned from Codename Kids Next Door. That's because K&D, while it provided me with hours of entertainment and made me feel happy, like I belonged somewhere, it didn't really teach me much. Maybe I'm wrong, but after a quick perusal of a few episodes, Codename Kids Next Door doesn't strike me as a very educational show. Which is fine, you know? Not every cartoon exists to teach, some of them exist to be fun and engaging, and K&D is that. It was so fun and engaging that I would fantasize about having my own division. I think I called myself number 48 or something. I saw myself in number 2 and wanted to be the brainiac of my own squad. I even made a club at school about it, put up a poster I drew myself, and invited anyone in class to join. 3 girls put their names down. Any other boy would have been upset that the only people who wanted to join his sick new clubs were girls, but I had fun with girls. My first exposure to anime was through Sailor Moon. I had a lot in common with girls as a kid. But for one reason or another, the club sort of fizzled out. I think I didn't realize that as a club leader, I had to think about fun events to do, and there wasn't really much to do in a small town. So I just kind of forgot about it until I saw one episode of Codename Kids Next Door. It was the 13th episode of Season 2, Operation END. My memory isn't that clear. I had to look up the episode. But I remember that it was the first time we got to see an actual decommissioning of a K&D agent. 4 of them, in fact. And I realized that for my club to stay canon, I would need to end things off not with a whimper, but with a bang. Kids Next Door included a lot of really gross things. There's an episode where a lady feeds kids eye crust and snot. There's another one where the kids fight a bunch of huge lice. And of course there's inappropriate stuff like children trying on bras thinking they're super weapons. Before I continue, K&D was not at fault for what was inevitably going to transpire. Ed, Edd, and Eddy had tons of gross shit too, and so did Flapjack, which I don't know if it was out yet, but SpongeBob definitely had that stuff. And I'm pretty sure all of these shows featured wedgies, which I, for some reason, included as part of the decommissioning process of my club. I hadn't really been taught why the golden rule was a thing. Yeah, I knew better than to hit anyone, but I had never been hit myself before. I had never been touched inappropriately. No person had ever done me harm in any way. How was I supposed to know how it felt? I was a kid. I wasn't a very social one. It took me longer to develop the same degrees of empathy that other children had. It's just part of who I was. I certainly had never been taught why we had to keep our hands to ourselves. My mother was highly religious. She never felt comfortable giving me the talk, even when I was ready for it later in life. I just didn't know. It didn't go far. I gave one of the girls a wedgie, and the rest called the teacher, and I was sent home. When my mom and sister heard what happened, it was the first time they really yelled at me. I was crying. I could tell that I did something wrong, but it took me so long to understand what. When I did, I felt so terrible. I apologized to the person I hurt when I got back to school the next day. She chose to forgive me, which is the only reason that I was eventually able to forgive myself. But I will never forget it. I will never forget how it felt to abuse someone like that, to manipulate them even as a child. I truly felt like a monster that day. Again, K&D was not at fault. Kids do stupid things, and they latch onto cartoons for ideas of what stupid thing to do next. It's part of learning, it's part of growing up, it's part of being human. But I didn't have shows like Steven Universe to teach me why what I did was wrong. I didn't have the arc where one character used another and had to be shown how much they hurt them. I didn't have the character who was abused and the abuser, and instead of falling into it again, finally said no. I didn't have the depiction of severe personal discomfort at being in a situation you don't want to be in. If I did, would I still have hurt her? I don't know. I will never know. But the possibility that this show could keep another kid from having to feel like I did, like a monster, the chance that a show that takes inspiration from this one could teach kids right from wrong about the way they treat each other, perhaps more effectively and thoroughly than the shows I saw as a kid. The fact that there is that maybe is more than enough for me to support these shows existing. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe this show would have changed me if I was a kid. Maybe it would have made me more interested in the gays TM and sent me spiraling down my path to hell faster and harder than anything else could. If you believe that, I have some bad news. There were shows that did that for me as a kid. In fact, there were shows that did that for you.
Hold the phone. Now give the phone to me.
Teen Titans Season 1, Episode 5, The Sum of His Parts, is an episode where Cyborg runs out of batteries and an insane robot man named Fix-It does exactly what he says on the tin. Fixes Cyborg, gives him a new battery cell. But when Cyborg tries to leave, Fix-It first tricks him and later forces him to stay, saying Cyborg is still broken. He then reveals that he is going to replace Cyborg's human half with more robot, making him full machine to remove his flaws and personality. Now, some of my viewers will see this as an episode about the nature of being flawed and how it makes us who we are, and being perfect would ruin that. When I see this, I immediately think about conversion camps. You know, the places where homophobic Christians send their kids to try to pray the gay away. What if I don't want to be repaired? What if I like me this way? Such thoughts come from your imperfect biological components. They will be replaced momentarily. Replace biological components with homosexuality, and you're looking at a priest trying to brainwash a kid into pretending they're straight. The episode ends with Cyborg not only breaking free, but giving Fix-It a glimpse of the world inside his head. Everything is bright and colorful, in contrast to the dark, dim place Fix-It has locked himself up in. It's too much for Fix-It to handle, and his connection meant to remove Cyborg's emotions unexpectedly reawakens his own. So beautiful. I had forgotten how beautiful. The world, through your eyes, through human eyes, the same kind you have. Perhaps I am the one in need of repairs, and maybe I'm the guy who can help repair you. Seriously, guys, replace the word human with the word gay, and you have a 1-to-1 conversion rate here. Poor phrasing, but I'm sticking with it. Fight me? There is power in being proud of who you are. It can change your whole perspective on life. When I discovered my bisexuality, sure, at first I was nervous and scared, but after a little while I felt happy. Suddenly a new world of possibility was open to me. Theoretically, I could be attracted to anyone. I wasn't limited to one gender of attraction like most people are. I feel better than I used to. Like I'm part of a community, a culture, something I've never had before. There is one last snippet of the episode, where a kid with a prosthetic hand comes up to Cyborg in a park and shows him to his friend. See? It's Cyborg! He's just like me! Whoa, cool! I am just like you. But it's not your arm that makes us the same. It's the stuff connected to it. This is what I'm talking about. This is the sign of a culture. The LGBTQIA+, sorry if I'm missing a few letters there, are not united because of some fantasy about us destroying the family unit. We're united by shared experience. Each of us has had to question why we're so different, why we don't feel the way others do, or why we do but in a different way. Each of us has thought there might be something wrong with us, or dug into those differences and made it look like they were our entire personality as a defense mechanism. Because each of us has had to defend ourselves from people who didn't understand and didn't want to. I never had to do that before outing myself on my channel. Now that I have, I can say it really sucks. But honestly, it's okay. Because I'm not alone, and I never will be again. There's a whole community at my back now, and I'm at theirs. Because they're just like me, not because of how we're similar, but because of where we differ. Don't like that the Teen Titans was secretly encouraging gayness? Well, let me tell you about a show called He-Man, where the main protagonist constantly wears either pink or an exposing chest guard, looks at people like this, and technically has a wife or girlfriend, but what gay man didn't when this show aired? Being outwardly gay was still kinda dangerous, and it still is in some places. I'm not gonna go into every instance of He-Man being gay, unless you want me to. But watch the way this man runs, listen to the words he uses, look at the pride with which he yells, "I have the power!" This man is at least somewhere on the spectrum, and kicking ass because of it. And besides, the animosity against homosexual rep in kids' cartoons is nonsensical. Why are these episodes and shows so bad for teaching kids that homosexuality exists? But the episode of Static Shock, where a character's parents are threatened with explosive collars, is fine. Remember when Codename Kids Next Door threatened its protagonists with cannibalism? Remember the episode of SpongeBob where Squidward thinks SpongeBob ate a bomb and is going to fucking die? So he spends the last day of SpongeBob's life being uncharacteristically kind to him in order to make his friend and co-workers' last moments happy ones? I'm not saying these shows are wrong for doing this, I'm saying that they're on a way darker level than homosexuality. Hell, if you're gonna have an issue with Steven Universe, have an issue with the stuff like this. Should we talk about the episode where Jasper fused with 2 corrupted gems, corrupting herself right before Steven's eyes, turning into a mindless monster completely irretrievable from the depths of insanity? Or maybe we should talk about how Steven had to defend himself against Bismuth, a friend and member of the Crystal Gems, and he stabs her in the chest with his mom's sword. Speaking of his mom, do we want to talk about the episode where Steven has an identity crisis about how much of him is him and how much of him is his own mother? Ha! Which one, right? We have been depicting highly lethal situations in animation for years. We have been discussing topics far too deep for children to entirely grasp since before I was born. Why is this where we draw the line? This show never uses the word sex. It never defines its terms in a real-world sense. The only way a kid could know what these things are supposed to be is if they already know about their real-world equivalent. You know what a kid is probably gonna think when they watch the episode where Ruby and Sapphire get married? They'll think, oh, I guess girls can marry girls too. That makes sense. And they're right, it does. If you really think this is too far, then I have only one thing left to show you. If you're willing to see it. I mean, you've come this far, you might as well go the whole mile, right? Besides, this is a really good one. A classic, even. The original Tom and Jerry cartoon ran for a total of 163 shorts, but in the 103rd, Blue Cat Blues, things took a dark turn. The audience was cued into this episode being unusual by the dulcet tones of Paul Frees narrating the story from the frame of Jerry as he describes Tom's fall into suicidal depression. The show is shockingly overt with this. We open on a shot of Tom sitting on the train tracks, looking entirely distraught before we tilt up to see Jerry standing on the frame of the bridge and looking down at his friend solemnly. Poor Tom. In a few minutes, it'll all be over. All be over. Tom is waiting for the train to arrive and end his life. You can't get more overt without using the word die, which just didn't happen in cartoons back then. The short is spent going through Tom's downward spiral into depression after meeting the female cat of his dreams and losing her to a rich jerk. He gives up all his savings, sells his future, a literal arm and a leg, and is that a slave contract? He starts drinking. Milk, sure, but it's clearly a stand-in for alcohol. He falls into the gutter and doesn't even care when he threatens to fall into a storm drain and drown. Jerry tries throughout the short to talk him out of seeing this girl. He knows how it's going to turn out. He can see the signs, and Tom doesn't listen to him. This was one of the episodes where Tom and Jerry were genuinely friends, and it's pretty cool for that, but man, this one doesn't pull any punches. The short ends with the target of Tom simping married to the rich asshole he tried so hard to be better than. Tom sits on the train tracks and waits for his life to end as Jerry laments that there was nothing he could do for him anymore. This was in the 1950s. People didn't really talk about mental health back then, and mental health back then wasn't really worth talking about. Jerry tried to keep his friend off this path, and he failed. So, that's the story. The story of a cat with a broken heart. Too bad everybody doesn't have a girl like mine. Wait, Jerry, no, you saw this happen from the outside. You know better than this. Jerry, what are you— Stop simping! Oh my god, Jerry, what are you doing? Cookie Cat, he's a pet for your tummy. Cookie Cat, he's super duper yummy. Cookie Cat, he left his family behind. That was the end. The end of the entire short. Tom and Jerry waiting on the train tracks as a locomotive's horn goes off closer than we would like. The short ends with the main characters committing suicide. I'm so glad cartoons have improved their moral standards. An episode like this might have traumatized me even more than I already was. Can you believe this was so many people's favorite cartoon? Like, I can believe it. Tom and Jerry was amazing and revolutionary for its time. It was one of the first Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It did so much for the worlds of comedy and animation alike, but this short just doesn't quit. It doesn't leave you with a happy ending. This is how far cartoons used to be willing to go. Now they're willing to go to different places. Places that are much happier and lighter than the ones Tom and Jerry went to. Yeah, sometimes they still go to really dark locations. But this one doesn't. The closest it ever gets is existential horror, not suicidal tendencies. I mean, compare this episode to the one where Steven and Connie learn the value of each other's presence, or the episode where Pearl and Garnet pour their hearts out to each other and manage to find some common ground, or the episode where Lapis Lazuli is implied to have recovered some of her love of the ocean. Maybe Steven Universe goes too far in what it teaches. Maybe it teaches these things the wrong way, or gives the wrong moral, but at least it's trying. This is the closest we've gotten to sex ed that's available for anyone with cable or Wi-Fi, of all ages. And we need that, because like it or not, all ages are able to learn about this stuff pretty much whenever they want. I would rather they hear it from a cartoon than a shady forum or a porn site. And why not teach them to be inclusive in regards to a steadily growing community that's not going away anytime soon? See, this is the problem. Even if you think that transgenderism is a mental illness and homosexuality is a curse brought about by the devil, you can't stop it. You can't change it. Maybe you feel that this show visualizes things kids shouldn't have to see. Maybe you'll always feel that way. We all have different limits, and we project those limits onto the world. It's not my fault that I don't like this. I'm correct in not liking this. I don't need to consider other possibilities. If I feel uncomfortable, something is wrong with the world. Nothing is wrong with me. I don't need to change. I felt that way for a long time too. It took a lot of effort for me to recognize the fallacy in that logic, to understand that the world isn't going to change to suit my vision, no matter what I try to do to it. I don't control the world, and the world can't control me either. The only thing that I have complete power to change is myself. I could run from the things that make me uncomfortable. I could never watch another Tom and Jerry short again. I could refuse to watch Codename Kids Next Door for the rest of my life. I could choose not to watch or revisit anything outside of my current worldview, or anything that reminds me of something bad that I've seen. But I'm not going to do that. Because everything that I see that I disagree with carries with it someone else's truth. And if another human being was willing to adopt it, then there must be a reason why. If I can understand the logic that drives that reason, whether or not I agree with it, I will be objectively more aware and more knowledgeable as a result. If you truly think that Steven Universe teaches children awful things, then I want to say thank you. Thank you for sitting through this entire video. I know it's been a lot, and you probably felt uncomfortable at some point. I'm sorry for doing that to you. But I think it's important for people like us on the opposite sides of what feels like one of the biggest arguments in animation right now to hear each other out. I don't know about you, but I'm done with hard lines and us versus them attitudes. They've been going on so long, I've gotten bored of them. But I can't stop them from happening. I can only choose not to participate. So, sorry if some of the things I said came off with too much animosity. I'm just really passionate about this. I'm sure I'm as passionate as you are about this. If there are two things Steven Universe teaches in spades, they are inclusiveness and forgiveness. Everyone is worthy of being loved. Everyone is worthy of a second chance. It teaches these things through a lens that means they are all the very young will see, and those slightly older will see something more valuable and relevant to them. It is the kind of show whose messages change as you grow older. Maybe I'll look back on this series in another 5 years and realize they taught me something I didn't see until I'd already experienced it for myself. I won't be surprised. They did it before. I'm going to follow this show's advice. I'm going to support kids' shows that teach children how to behave when they're older. Shows that teach kids about the spectrum of sexuality and gender and why it's worthy of respect. You can be uncomfortable with that. No one's stopping you. Because I don't need you to respect me, I respect me. I don't need you to love me, I love me. But I want you to know you could know me if you change your mind. If you change your mind. If you change your mind. Change your mind.